Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Build Your Workers' Comp Book. My name is Zanae Agostini. I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs. And I'm going to get you started today, but our real instructor of the day is Darby Johnson, and she's our workers' comp underwriter, so she's knowledgeable and is going to bring to your attention a lot of great pointers about work comp and how to build your book. Last but not least, I want to introduce Jacob Cole, our marketing coordinator, and he does everything behind the scenes to make things happen for all of you. Makes our webinars run smoothly and runs our marketing department. So without further ado, let's get started. So of course, the logistics are that you are on mute. You're going to be able to hear, but you won't be able to speak. But again, your voice is important to us, so pose those questions in the chat room and put them in there anytime throughout the webinar, and we will stop and answer those questions. We're watching for those questions to come in, and we'll make sure we get you an answer. And then we'll have a short survey at the end of the webinar, so we'd really appreciate your feedback on that as well. Now, what's our objectives for today? It's all going to be about workers' comp, and if you don't have if you don't have the work comp with all the other policies that a business needs, you've got another broker as your competition. So don't forget the work comp. That's always going to be important. So and ideally, the way to get the work comp is competitive, quotes fast, and Darby's going to talk about that. Also, how complete Accord apps, and she's going to point out a few things. Things are changing with the carriers a little bit. So what's really needed and what's important to be on that Accord app and why. And why is an important part of that. And then also best practice strategies for maintaining your renewals. That's always valuable, especially in this day and age with the post-COVID. And then she will be talking about premium audits and cancellations and changes that have gone on there as well. So here's Darby, and here's a general list of the classes of business that she writes. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a more detailed list, but this is a place to start. I wanted to introduce Darby, and you get to see her picture. So I'm going to get this started with just talking a little bit about post-COVID. I'm calling it post-COVID chaos. There's been so many unusual claims that have occurred during COVID that, and definitely the carriers have gone through enormous changes in their work environment, people having to go home and work from home. So there's been service problems, communication problems, because there just isn't the cohesiveness that had been there previously with insurance companies trying to run smoothly. So those are things to pay attention to. Some carriers are faring better than others, but they're all having to reevaluate coverages and premiums. There's no question about that. And you were seeing some coverages such as D&O and cyber liability become just enormously difficult. Carriers are pulling out of the business, but there are others who are experiencing unusual claims, and premiums are going up, rates are going up. So and the only good news that there is right now is that workers' comp coverage has proven to be COVID resilient. They didn't anticipate it, but it has not turned out to be the high claim activity that was anticipated. So there is still a competitive edge with workers' comp, and carriers' rates have not increased substantially. But everything changes, so we're not out of the woods yet, and we've got a couple new strains floating around, and so it's hard to say what's going to happen next. But just to bring you up to date and to make sure that you stay prepared for change happening at any time. I'm going to turn this over to Darby and let her get started.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to touch briefly on a few important policy concerns because due to COVID, some really important items may have fallen through the cracks. So I want to touch on how to avoid them. The first is accurate payroll. So when working an account, you should be considering all changes and exposures. Any payroll changes that happen midterm should be endorsed onto the policy. Now that businesses are opening and payroll is increasing, it's really important to request endorsements from your agent so the policy can accurately reflect the payroll of their business. This kind of rolls into the audits because if payroll is not accurate, at the end of the policy, the insured is going to owe premium. And the problem here is that payment plans aren't an option in order to pay off the balance. Where an endorsement midterm, it would be broken out into the remaining installments on the policy term. So it's important to touch base with your insured throughout the policy in order to avoid this. The next is accurate location addresses. This is important because any employee that goes to work at a location every day, this location needs to be on the policy. The issue here is that if a claim occurs at a location that isn't listed, there may be no coverage. So any addresses that get added on throughout the policy term, midterm, or at the start, and you forget to put that on the Accord application at first, go ahead and reach out to your agent so they can make sure to endorse that into the policy. And then lastly is officer exclusion and inclusions. So entities that are eligible for exclusions must complete them. This is probably the largest issue I see in workers' comp, because if the forms aren't submitted, all owners are going to be included at the highest rated class code when the audit is completed by the carrier. This becomes a problem, obviously, because it's going to increase the audit premium owed, and as I mentioned previously, it's not going to be broken up into an installment plan. Carriers are unwilling to backdate exclusion forms, so the day your policy binds, you're going to need to submit those forms as well. So now, we'll go into our next slide. Now that we know our books have shrunk, the need for new business is far greater. It's really important to have a good understanding of the risk you're submitting and ask the appropriate questions to your insured upfront. I want to provide you with a quick and competitive quote, so here's why I need the below information. Entity name and insured contact information. I need to know their DBA, their entity type, and it's really important to complete this portion of the application based off of how they're filed with the state. Otherwise, there's going to be issues at the time of the audit. The FEIN number, this is absolutely mandatory. It's how all our carriers track submissions and how we're able to even quote with any carrier. A detailed description of operations. You need to know what the business is and what services they're offering. We're finding that lots of companies perform more than one type of service, so be sure to list all services as most companies are diversified. If we aren't accurate with classifying the employees at the time of audit, they could be placed into a higher rated class code, resulting in owed premium, or the policy could be non-renewed. For example, I've received Accord applications that just state contractors. This doesn't give me enough information in order to quote with any carrier. Are they general or artisan? What type of work is being performed? I need all of these details to provide an accurate quote. The next is payroll classification. If they haven't had any prior coverage and you aren't sure of the class code, it's important that you give a description for each employee, as I mentioned previously, so I can assign the best fit class code. If they have had prior coverage, please add those classes to the Accord and specify the part-time versus full-time employees. Years in business and lost history. So the years in business portion, it's probably missed 99% of the time when the Accord application is being completed. And every carrier is going to require this information, so in order to speed up that process, just putting it on there at first, it's really going to help. Most are unaware that actually this can help your insured. They give credits to businesses that have been around longer, so putting that there, it's actually, you're going to help the premium go down. And then the loss history. This is required to determine eligibility with carriers, so I'm going to need this if they have had prior coverage. The next is a supplemental application, which we'll actually go over in the next slide. So this is going to be required depending on the insured's operations or risks over $10,000 in premium or higher. If your insured is an HOA or a property management risk, it's oftentimes required by carriers, but for any contracting risk, the supplemental application is always required as the exposure is much higher. And then, we're going to need more details in order to quote that, as I mentioned with the contracting example. Our website actually offers this under the Applications Workers Comp tab. And when you click into the risks, you can see if it is required to have a supplemental application or not, and then download it from our website. So, below we have a contractor's artisan, and it states that the Accord 130 is required along with the supplemental application. It's typically 1 to 5 pages depending on the risk, and it just gives a more in-depth understanding of what the insured's operations are. So this is actually really going to save a lot of time, and I won't have to go back and forth asking questions when I'm submitting this because it'll all be completed for me in the beginning. Now we'll go just briefly over the Accord as I was stating. This is a business I created, so everything that is highlighted is the information I need completed in order to quote. The applicant name, which is a sole proprietor and has a DBA, the years in business, which is 1, the mailing and physical location address. So if there's more than one address, make sure to list every single one under the locations. And then the 9-digit FEIN and proposed effective dates. On the next slide, you'll see the contact name for the business along with the email and phone number. Sometimes I only get the phone number, sometimes I'll only get the email, other times it's completely blank. I need all 3 in order to quote and bind with any carrier. This is how the insured is going to receive invoices from the carrier for payments or any notices if the carrier is trying to get in contact with the insured. The individual's excluded and included portion is extremely important and left blank or filled out incorrectly. It needs to have every single owner listed here if they're going to be included or excluded from coverage, and obviously ownership should equal 100%, along with their title to the business. This is important because I need to know which exclusion form the insured needs prior to binding coverage so they're properly excluded from coverage. The rating information, so if they have multiple locations, as I mentioned previously, you'll break down the payroll at each location along with the full-time and part-time employees. So if you don't know the class code in the categories portion, you can just briefly list what they're doing. And then in the next slide, we're going to go over the prior carrier information. Here's a great place to actually put the annual premium from their other policies. That way I know the target premium we can get under in order to bind coverage. It gives me some indication of where we need to be so that way we can get you a competitive quote. It's also important, to attach those loss runs. I know here you list it out, but the physical loss runs, they provide a breakdown of the claims, and sometimes the carriers want to know a little bit more information. And then the description of operations, which should include the years of business, the business operations, and the loss information. So we'll go into our next slide now, and we're going to talk about an experience mod. Just briefly, but it is important for new business and renewals. So an experience mod is a state-mandated numeration that is applied to eligible businesses, and it's calculated by comparing the insured's actual losses to their expected losses. So 100% is going to be break even. Anything above 100% is going to be a debit, and below is a credit. For risks located in California, you can actually obtain a risk summary report, which is on the left here, or the right, I'm sorry, and you can obtain that through the WCIRB to see your insured's experience mod history. And if you want to print that out and submit it along with the Accord application, that'll actually help me giving that information to the carriers. So we have the claims management and loss control for insureds that don't have a great claims history, which I highly recommend utilizing your carrier's claims management services. Most carriers, they'll offer programs or resources you can utilize to create a safer workplace, resulting in fewer claims, and then bringing that experience mod down. Two carriers I use frequently, AmTrust and Employers, they offer complimentary claims management services where you can create an online account that is specific to the claims. This provides a comprehensive list of tools and services to prevent losses and stay in compliance. They offer things like training resources, OSHA inspections, return to work programs for injured workers, self-checklists. There's a plethora of things you can utilize. And for insureds that have a large premium or high-risk exposure, I highly recommend your insured sign up for this to mitigate any claims. Your experience mod is going to, it's going to determine your eligibility with carriers. Of course, mods that are break even or below 100% are favorable to most carriers. However, our agency has been recently appointed with carriers that are willing to look at those problem accounts, mods that are even over 150%. So any accounts you may have that aren't as favorable, you can still send over to me and I can try and quote with our carriers. Carriers, they will become, more willing to even write insureds with high experience mods if they see a decrease in claims frequency and they're utilizing their claims management program. So now we'll go into the audits, which I do want to touch on because this is a major issue in workers' comp and there's some things you can avoid and some tips. So obviously all workers' comp policies are subject to a premium audit. From an underwriting perspective, this is where I see the biggest problem because when the policy renews, it's not done at that point. The insured is going to have an audit that has to be completed from the expiring policy, and oftentimes they don't think about it because they didn't get it in the mail or they're having issues, especially during COVID. People who aren't in the office every single day, their audit forms are being mailed to their business addresses and they're not receiving it, so it's falling through the cracks. So it's important to remind your insured, even though that policy expires, they're still going to have to complete that audit. So it's important, that we're getting these completed, as this is going to determine if the payroll and exposures were accurate throughout the term. So there's a difference between voluntary audits and physical audits. Physical audits, someone is actually going to come out to the place of business. So the insured is going to receive a letter requesting payroll records for the company, so state unemployment forms, payroll journals, and once the requested documents are sent to the carrier, a representative from the carrier is actually going to contact the insured directly to schedule a time to come out to their business and conduct the audit. This isn't something that can be avoided, and you can't, if once it's already determined it's going to be a physical audit, you can't go back. So it's important that, your insured is contacting the carrier and making sure they're setting up that time. And this is usually, yes.
There was a quick question that came in, so and I think it relates to what you're talking about. Do you offer monthly reporting, and if so, does this offset the audit?
Yeah, so certain carriers we're appointed with will offer monthly reporting. It just depends based on the carrier. This will offset the audit. So if you're doing that every single month, it's not going to be at the end of the policy term anymore. But that is going to depend on the carrier and their requirements. And the physical audit, so going back to that, it's going to depend on the premium size and the risk exposure. So larger premiums are more likely to have a physical audit. Bigger risks like contracting, those would tend to have a physical audit as well. A voluntary audit, it's the typical one that most insureds receive. It's typically 5 pages long, and it's going to be sent to the insured's mailing address. So it's really important when that policy is bound that it is, we have the correct mailing address on file. It's going to list the documents and information required in order to complete that, and then you can send that back to our agency and we'll submit it to the carrier for you. The potential effect of uninsured and unlicensed vendors. So any insured who's using subcontractors needs to provide each of the subcontractors' workers' comp insurance certificates when they're completing their audit. Otherwise, it's going to be included in there. Their workers' comp insurance certificates, it's really important that they fall in line with the insured's policy dates. Otherwise, they're going to be included in the insured's final audit. I recently had an insured trying to dispute their audit because they had 17 or so subcontractors included in that. So I asked the insured to send me a list of their certificates of insurance so I could dispute the audit. But when I was reviewing them, I noticed two things. The first was that they didn't actually have the workers' compensation coverage, and so they were going to be included, those ones that did not have the workers' compensation coverage. And the second thing, on a few of them, I noticed that the certificates of insurance didn't fall in line with the insured's policy dates. So this ended up costing the insured about $7,000. So, you know, when you're having those subcontractors work for the business, it's really important the insured double checks to make sure that they all have certificates of insurance with both requirements in order to be excluded from the audit. And so next we'll just go into, so these are going to be our target workers' compensation classes. This is a comprehensive list of everything I'm able to write. You know, we have a broadness of a lot of classes and a lot of competitive carriers for these classes. So Jacob is actually going to be sending a list of our target products to you all tomorrow. But, you know, this is also on our website, so you can go in and see if there's a risk that you need coverage for that our office is able to write.
Great, Darby. Great job, good information. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. If you have any further, we have one other question. I have a book of timber operators and loggers. Do you have a market? And I'm not sure what state we're talking about.
Yeah, so that is a risk with a higher exposure. I would need just a little bit more information on it. You know, how many years in business? Okay, so they're in California. If you'd want to go ahead and send over an email to me, or we can chat on the phone about the risk. We may have one carrier who could consider writing this, as it is a higher exposure. But you can go ahead and shoot me an email or give me a call after the webinar's over to discuss it further if you'd like.
Great, great. Okay, thank you, Darby, and thank you for that question. Make sure that you visit our website, CIDinsurance.com. There are so many broker tools on that website that there's proposal templates, there's marketing, customized marketing material, just so much. So I encourage you. A lot of educational tools on there. And again, you can see our upcoming webinars, and we have many, many recorded webinars that you can go in and learn about different coverages and different classes of business and the coverages they need. So that is a great tool. Again, here's Darby's contact information. You can reach out to her directly. We're very responsive on both phone and our email. We are in our office, and so there's no concerns whether you can communicate with us or not. You can. And then again, submissions at CIDinsurance.com. Send over your work comp submissions today. Look forward to seeing you or to having you in another webinar and doing business together. Thank you again for joining us.